and get started, since, you know, a little short-handed today, but that's okay. So we're gonna spend probably 30, 45 minutes today, maybe less, really short, to kind of cover some basics about daily care, management, and health. Very, very basics. And if you've been in the show, you at least know what I'm going to be talking about today. Fairly simple, but if you do have questions, I'm happy to answer them for you. So, if you didn't bring your packet, that's okay. We're going to start on page 9, where it says daily care and management, is where I'm going to be talking from. But I'm going to follow the slide, so I'll be looking up here, and I'll also be looking at this too when I get to it. So, but like I said, pretty simple stuff today. So we'll get started. So we're going to start with barns and facilities. So, you know, obviously goats need a place to stay, right? And so ideally you need to have an area where they can go inside for the cold weather. You know, like it may be really cold on Wednesday, right? And possible chances to snow until, you know, early April when you do get them. So inside is always a good place, but they also need to have a place to go outside, you know, go to the bathroom and get some sunlight, right? So ideally that's the best to let them go in and out, ideally, and then just have enough space for each animal. I know some people say like, you know, 20 square foot per head. I think that just varies, but most of you are gonna at least have 1 or 2, right? And then, or more. And so, you guys that have been in the project a little bit more and have parents that are, you know, in charge of that, you're able to at least understand who needs to have plenty enough room so it's not too crowded. And then obviously for temperature control, if you do have them in the barn, just allow time and space for wind to kind of carry through there and airflow, because goats can get respiratory diseases, just like any other animal. And whenever they're really, really close and sheltered, and we don't get the good airflow that we get, you know, we can't breathe very well. And so that's not good, right? So you gotta make sure that they can breathe well, everything else. So just make sure that temperature's good and airflow is coming through there if you do have them, you know, inside a barn a lot. So keep that in mind. And then, you know, you want to clean out your stalls and your pens, however you have it set up, right? Because, you know, their feces or poop, right, can contract all those flies. And then it just makes a mess and it's just really gross and they just, you know, sit there. So you need to clean out those pens, guys, you know, on a regular basis. When you can. That way the goats don't start eating that stuff and, you know, get something in their body that they don't really need. So, you know, just daily care. And you guys probably are cleaning your pens, but just make sure it's always a good idea to do that, okay? And then pen design, bedding, and animal capacity. This slide is also in your book, so you can look at it on page 9. So, just like what we just talked about, enough space. You know, with goats, they can jump, right? So don't have anything short where they can jump and break a leg, right? And then if you do have a pen that, you know, it may be where it's not tall enough, have those vertical that's small enough where they don't squeeze right through yet. You know, like what you'll see at State Fair or Kansas Junior Livestock Show. If you do have them inside a barn, maybe you can put them in one of those pens that has the vertical bars. That way they are not jumping up there and breaking a leg. Trust me, I've seen it at a county fair, okay? A long time ago. So that's why I mentioned that. But at home, I'm sure you guys have a tall enough, you know, fence where they're not jumping out. But always make sure, because we don't want that to happen to you guys, right? So, like I said, goats can escape. You know, if it is vertical, make sure that they're big enough that they don't completely go through. Yes, Emma?
Mine jumped over it's pen that my mom and dad built, and we figured out it was bouncing off the tree.
Yeah, so you got to figure out their escape routes, right? So just be mindful that goats are curious animals, just like humans are, and so make sure they don't go in and out where they don't need to be. Okay, plain and simple. And their bedding. So you want to make sure if you do have them on regular just ground, like outside, that's fine. Some goats do get bored and they'll eat the sand. or rocks or dirt. I've seen that before. And if that happens, it's because it's a nutritional deficiency or a mineral deficiency. So they may be craving like salt or something else. So there could be a few things in the diet that they're not getting when they eat stuff like that, or if they're really hungry. I've seen that happen before. So keep that in mind if you have them on just regular ground. So be careful if they have big belly for some reason after they've ate, or the next day if they seem bloated in the morning when you haven't fed them that morning. You know, if it just looks out of the ordinary, probably eating something else that they don't need to be eating. So if you have to muzzle them, muzzle them. We only muzzle them when we go to show. So obviously because we don't want them to eat the shavings, but that's what we do. If you guys do have them on like shavings or cedar fiber or something along that line, that's fine. Just make sure you clean it out like once a week, because that stuff sits. Ammonia can cause that stuff to build up, and your goats will get sick and possibly die from it. It's happened before if we don't take care of it. Parasites, their crap, their feces, fluid. If it's too wet, flies, bugs, everything kind of goes to it. So that's not good, right? So make sure it's clean and dry. That's my point of the issue. And then that helps to prevent fungus, but also maintain that hair and hide quality. And keep them white. Prevent the stains if you do have them on cedar fiber. And then animal capacity, like we just talked about a little bit ago. You know, I don't know everyone's situation, but growing up we started out with like 3 or 4 goats, and then we started getting like 10 plus. So for different shows. So if you have a large pen, split them up if you can. For us, we individually fed them, but they were housed in the same pen. If there was like 6 to a pen, but they're, you know, big size pen, like from there probably to the back of the front door. So it's big size enough pen that we could house 6 comfortably. But for feeding wise, we didn't want just one to go get the groceries. So if you are feeding them individually, that's great. That way you know which ones are getting the nutrition that they need to. That way you don't have a few just eating them, and then you have the ones that aren't getting enough feed, because you do need to make sure all your goats are getting the right amount of feed, right? So that's all that I'll say on that. But do whatever is best for you. I'm just speaking from experience, but also feel like I have to say that just so you guys are aware. So, not on this page or in your booklet. This is from a different slide that I found from Texas that I like to use. Feeders, if you are feeding them, you know, 2 to a pen, I think that's fine, as long as one doesn't get more than the other, right? But feeders need to be kind of off the ground. You know, we don't need to have feed that, because if the feed is on the ground, that's not good. Okay, they don't need to be eating stuff that's off the ground. So, shoulder height, ideally, is what I would prefer for them, not me, meaning shoulder height on the goats, okay? That way each animal has access to it, but if you need to change it, obviously use some clips or something to move it when you need to. And if you individually feed them, that's great, just make sure that they can reach it. I know a lot of people use cinder blocks, or possibly use cinder blocks on something to elevate it. We've tried that too, but sometimes that actually breaks down their loin and their spine, so it may not be beneficial to get them really elevated off the ground where the front feet are off the ground and the back feet are touching. A lot of people I know have done that in the past, as well as sheep people, so I'm not going to say don't do it, but we don't prefer it. It's not something that we do. So that's you guys, when you continue to do that, you don't have problems, that's good, but I would just say at least get the feeder off the ground, but don't make the goat get off the ground necessarily, is all I'm going to say on that, okay? Let me see. So yeah, just kind of like what I said earlier, if you're individual feeding, that's great, but if you are feeding more than one in the same pen, in the same feeder, just kind of pay attention in the next couple months, especially when you're getting the county fair, if there's one that's eating more than the other, and if you need to hand feed the other one and start feeding them separately, it's probably a good idea. So, it's never a bad idea to feed them individually. If you do feed them individually, we made pens, or at least feed them side by side where they're still competitive enough that they'll eat them, eat the feed if they need to, but also it's timing. You know, you feed them on a regular basis, and they'll be hungry at that point, and they'll be eating it. If they're not eating, then they're just not hungry, so you need to make sure you're feeding the the right amount, start small, then add as you go. That way they're still eating their own feed, okay? So in the summer, it gets really hot, right? And so they don't like to eat a whole lot of food, right? So that's why it's important to feed it during the cool times of the day on a regular basis. So if you need to start feeding them at 6, 6:30 or 7, because I know in the summertime it gets hot already by, in the early 70s sometimes, when you wake up. So keep that in mind, they'll eat better when it's cold. So feed them early as you can in the morning and at night, if it's not too late for your bedtime. But I would start feeding them when it starts to get dark, anywhere from 8, 8:30 to 9. I know that may be late for some of you kids, but that's usually about the right time when it's cooler. I know it's spread out, but it's cooler during the summertime, so they'll eat better. Okay? That's just pretty much what that last sentence is saying. It just helps them grow more and be more effective in doing it. So management continued. Now we're back to this. So obviously weather, weather is very important right now. They may not eat very well with it being hot and cold, just like us. And so if it is cold, make sure you do have them in a closed place, or can bring them into the barn if they're in a lean-to underneath. That's great. And then if you do need to have a blanket, we honestly don't blanket anything until they're sheared or clipped. But if you are regular people that like to keep blankets on them all the time, or especially when it's cold, that's okay. That's your personal preference. For us, we just don't. We don't have just the time to make sure they're always on or off. So when we don't clip them, they don't get a blanket at our house. But other than that, if it's cold and besides a blanket, and you have them inside a barn, heat blanket's always nice, right? But other than that, during the summertime, when it's outside and it's hot, goats are actually very tolerant to heat. But like I mentioned earlier, airflow is important, but also we need shade, right? Okay, so make sure they can get in the shade, even though they like to sunbathe in the summertime. So that's important. And then if you have them in the barn or in a cooler type situation, make sure to give them a fan if they don't have enough airflow through there. So it's one thing you can fix the problem. And then water. We'll talk about water next month with nutrition. It's one thing I really want to cover is nutrition, as well as parts of the goat. So we'll cover that next month, more than likely, so be prepared. But water is the most important nutrient that you can give an animal, just like us humans, okay? Water is important, but also the quality, meaning clean, and it's fresh, nice and cold, is very, very important, because when it's cold water, more than likely they'll go and drink it right there, okay? Rather than it being hot. We found out that those light colored buckets, instead of it being dark, the dark red ones or the dark green or anything like that, it contracts heat a lot faster, so it doesn't stay cool near as long. So when you have them out in the summertime and the water isn't in the shade, ideally, get you a lighter colored bucket. So maybe like a light green or a light blue or something to that extent to help the water stay cool as near as long as possible. Just because when it's summertime and throughout the day, that water heats up, so they don't drink it near as often. We don't use automatic waters at our house, but if you have a big commercial operation, that's what you need to use. More than likely, when you have 100 head plus to a pen, that's great. If not, just a regular bucket. I'm sure you guys do that already, but just make sure you clean it and change it. I like clean water every night, if I can dump it, if it's not in a big enough bucket. I am that particular about it, okay? My dad is not as much, and so I'm like, no, they will not drink it. It really does affect them, and so it doesn't allow them to digest very good. They're not gaining their weight. They're getting dehydrated, especially in the hot summertime. So please give them clean water as much as possible and change it out, okay? And wash the bucket. Those buckets get moldy. I didn't put that on the slide or in here, but those buckets will mold. So make sure you clean it out with like soap and water, some Dawn, once a month, or when you feel like you need to clean it. that's great too, okay? So, very, very important. So when the water's clean, they'll eat more and drink more. They'll help them with their nutrition and growing, okay? And you've covered mainly all of that on that slide. So now we're in our next part, which maybe won't take another 15 minutes, so bear with me, okay? We're going to talk about health and diseases. A few of you in the room, I know, are younger, so it may be a little bit above your head, but that's okay, just hang with me. Parent or someone, I'm sure you know what I'm talking about at some point in time, so that's why it's going to be important for your parents too. So, okay, so health is very important, and health and nutrition go hand in hand. But whenever you have a good healthy goat that eats really well, like I said, their gain will be higher, but it allows them to be more efficient, but it also helps to get to that target weight when you have them going to the county fair or on. So it's always good to keep that going. General health that I added on here, you know, if you see signs of snotty noses because of weather change, or their head just they're kind of hanging down, or they feel a little bit lethargic, just not very good, or they're not eating very good. I've seen that happen a lot, and obviously their change of stool, if it goes from solid to liquid. Again, I'm very blunt, so you gotta watch that stuff, okay? Because they're not feeling good, or something is in their feed that's not very good, or water that's causing those issues. But like right now, coccidiosis is a big thing. I'll talk about it in the next slide or two, so I'll get to that point. But in the springtime, when weather goes like this, we kind of get sick also at the same time. Coccidiosis is pretty bad during this time of year in spring, so it's always good to put stuff in the water and make sure you're feeding correctly, but watch them really hard. And then if they just aren't feeding well and they're not eating like in 28, 48 hours, call a vet, okay? And then if any other issues arise, just call a vet. So sometimes the parent doesn't know everything. Trust me, I've seen that before too, so anything can happen. Okay, now we're going to talk about parasites. I'm sure you little ones in the room may not know what a parasite is, but that's a bug. It's a bad bug. We don't want it, okay? Parasites we can also get, which we'll talk about. That's not good. And the parasite can live just like us on the outside of our skin or on the inside. When I'm talking about the inside, I'm talking about the gut, where the stomach's at, okay? It can house both ways. The parasites will live on both of those, okay? They can live inside as long as they can, and they'll live on the outside of their body as long as the temperature is great for it, and the parasites can breed and make more. That's bad, right? Yes, very bad. So, the different types of external parasites are mites, flies, and lice. Like we have head lice on our head. Not right now, right? I hope not. But if you've had that problem or you know what I'm talking about, goats can get that too. And just like us, if we get lice, we itch. Goats do the exact same thing. They itch their bodies. They roll, they scratch. That is a telltale sign if you have lice. It can live in the ground. They can breed just like any other parasite. Very important. We're actually doing some worming and stuff like that for our place. Just because they can live in the ground and you don't know where they carry it. So pretty much lice everything. But when they start to lose the hair on the backs of and they start to itch and cross the fence a lot more than you think they should, and they actually lose hair, you got lice on the farm. Okay? We will cover in a second, or I actually do put it up here. We like to use porons, like ivermectin for wormer, and then silence is actually what we're using for lice. So if it's left untreated, whenever they don't feel good, and something's attacking their system, they're not going to eat very good. Okay? So when they're not eating very good, they're not going to grow. Part of the problem. So, but they'll also impact their hide and quality of their wool if you do have sheep, but the hide. So where their hair is growing, where you want to keep the hair on, that's really important. So make sure that that isn't a problem. But if they do lose hair and they're scratching, you got lice. Main point of the story. But goats are pretty susceptible are meaning more than likely to get internal parasites because they eat off the ground. They like to nibble. When you eat off the ground, you can get or carry things from that, whether that's feces, old feed, and then any other birds that fly in to get the feed and they go to the bathroom in that pen, and the goats. It all is a system like this, or claw, whichever way you're looking at it from here. So they will get it somehow, some way, even if it's brought in. So that's why it's important to deworm. This Texas site said to deworm like every 14 days. I think you're fine to do it once a month if you really feel like you don't have that much issues. That's great. But always better to be proactive than reactive, right? You don't want to have those kind of problems because they're not going to feed well and you'll be able to tell those signs. But that's pretty much what I'm going to cover with parasites to make it simple for you guys. Fungus. At least all of you probably know what I'm talking about, right? Can I get some head nods, please? Yes? Okay. Figured so. Just going to cover it real quick so we can say we covered it. But everyone knows what it looks like. If not, there's a couple pictures in this guide that shows you what it's like. They're kind of saying that you, at once in your lifetime, or more than once, when you're in the show ring, whether you're, I always got it in sheep and goats, but more so in sheep, fungus is always going to be an issue. That's also why we don't take any animals to spring shows, because they just got something else sick, and then they get fungus. So we started not taking our goats to the spring shows and things like that, and jackpots, because they always ended up getting sick, and we ended up losing their hair. So we'd grow back after a while, but for us, I don't like it. So most of the time we're not ready yet either. So, but if you do feel like you're ready and you can control it, that's great. Go do that then. But something about fungus. It's contagious. You girls know what that means, right? Contagious. You know, like those cooties, you don't want them? Yeah, that's what I'm talking about. Okay? Because the animals, they can get like this fungus, you can also get. You know why I know that? Guess what? I have had it. I'm actually very sensitive to it. So, and I've had it in multiple places in my body, but I've also had it in my stomach, in my gut, where I was talking about this parasite can live. Because it's the right breeding ground, it's just going to stay there. You'll get heartburn too, but if there's patches, obviously use red ringworm, go to the dermatologist or a regular doctor. They'll give you medication for it. Other than that, I'm going to talk about the animal side now. So small, red-brown patches, really red, but it has a scab on top of it, and there's no hair or wool. It's bare. So that's how you know you got fungus. So, you know, after a show, or when you're in our spring showing, or even down the line after county fair and you got to go to state fair or something like that, wash your goat with antifungal shampoo and do that before you put them in the trailer, and before you put on that blanket that you just took off before they went in the show ring, because that can carry if it touches something else. You never know where you're going to put it. So ideally just go ahead and start shampooing everything and clean it so you at least know that you did that. Obviously keep your facilities clean and dry, like your trailer, all your other equipment, your show equipment, things like that. Your show halters or your show chains, your metal ones, those are easy to clean and disinfect. If you're using something else, that's fine. Just try to clean it because that is important. And then if goats are infected, you know, that cootie word that I said earlier, contagious, other goats can get it if one got it. So if you can and you have the space, isolate them to prevent it from spreading. Got it? Yeah, that's all I'll say on that. And I think, okay, I think this is maybe the last slide, so almost done, guys. Okay, so have any of you heard about sore mouth before? If you have, please raise your hand. Okay, that's good. Okay, so I don't have a picture up here because it's kind of gross, but it's pretty much exactly what it's saying. Sore mouth. So So there's legit sores they can get on their mouths. There's a lot of ways that they can get it. Right now we're having babies, or we've already had our babies, but we give them a sore mouth vaccine in the ear not long after they're born, and when we start tagging them. So if they get that vaccine, a lot of people do it differently. So, but for us, that's our way to go ahead and get that vaccine, get it out of their system, and they shouldn't get it again. But just like the flu, you get it every 10 years or so, and you may get the flu again. So goats can get it, even if they've been vaccinated before. But we've had most of the time, if they do get it, it's because they haven't had the vaccine, or they missed it, or they got it from someone else, especially if you're taking them to a show. Sore mouth, like I said, there's sores in the mouth, and then there's also something called ORF. There's a couple other medical terminologies that I didn't put up here. So that sore mouth, you know, when they're little and they suck on mom, right? There can be sores on her teeth, and then they'll carry that. And then if they go and eat in the feeder, they carry that. And then if they itch themselves and they go to the bathroom and they sniff somebody else's, you know, rear end, it can spread. That's what I'm talking about, is ORF. So where it can spread through multiple parts of the body. But sore mouth is contagious. We've had problems with stuff in our goat herd, but whenever I did show, I only had 1 or 2 sheep that got it. A vet will pretty much tell you iodine is about the only cure. And so if you do have any other questions, or you want to ask your vet if you do have sore mouth problems, especially during the show season, iodine works, but it takes a while. Pretty diligent. And my sheep only got it on the mouth, so I had to use cotton pads and just scrub the heck out of both sides or whatever I could find it. And it took about 2-3 weeks. So it's not a cure in one day. Okay, keep that in mind. So if you have had problems with that in the past, and you already know how to deal with it, great. If you don't have that yet, and you may have in the future, please call a vet, see if they can give you any other advice. But literally the only thing we've been able to use is iodine. So that's what I'll add to that. And then a couple big words for you kids is enterotoxemia. And that's just when you eat a lot, or you overeat, when you don't need to. So that usually happens when their feed is changed really suddenly, and they eat a lot more than they should. This is pretty deadly because not a lot of symptoms show, so that's why their death rate on that part is high. Okay? There's really no sign. I've seen a few does, big mama does, that have just overate and died alone for you two in the back. So I've seen it happen. So just be cautious of that when you have you're more than likely, you won't have as much little ones, but that's why you give them an overeating shot to help with that before you guys get them. Like as a breeder, we need to give that before you guys, so you shouldn't have any issues, but they can get it just because of show reactions being changed, or something else attacked the body. So, big problem. But not a lot of signs, so it's hard to detect it. And then coccidiosis, literally what I just mentioned earlier. So signs of that include watery, bloody diarrhea, mainly watery. It's just going to be really diarrhea. Green, just not very good looking. And they don't look good. More than likely they lost some weight, they're not eating very good, and they're sucked up. When I say sucked up, that means that stomach, their loin, is really skinny and thin. They're not eating very good, so they're going to show some weight loss, and they're going to be dehydrated because they can't retain fluids because they're crapping it out, for lack of better words. So, and then coccidiosis is just very contagious. So when you have more than one, there's an issue. We like to put cord in our water, but we also give it directly in the mouth in a syringe. So that's what we use. I know there's other things probably out there, but if you have more than one that has issues, call a vet. Like I'll say on anything, because I'm not a vet, so I'm not going to tell you what to do. So that's what we use for coccidiosis. Okay, I lied. I think this is maybe the last one, but hopefully so. Okay, and then a couple other things. I know it's big for you kiddos, but I'm going to try to at least say it. So, urinary calculi, it's really common in males. So your wethers and your rams, all you guys have wethers. So, the urinary calculi is a lot like kidney stones. I know most of you don't know the kidney stones that are little, but it's just like this big stone. It's right where you need to go to the bathroom. You can't go to the bathroom. And so it's blocking it. That's bad. So then they can't go to the bathroom. And then they can't really eat or retain fluids because they can't go to the bathroom and they get bloated and then they die. Yeah. So, doesn't happen very often. We have had a few die from that, but not too many. So, literally like one or two. And most of the time it's something in the diet. So for me, when I took nutrition, you're going to learn the calcium and phosphorus ratio. So that's urinary calculi is whenever you're higher in phos and you're lower in calcium. That's why whenever a lot of people recommend you to drink milk, it's because it has a good amount of calcium in it, so it breaks that stuff down and you don't have as much problems. So if that's higher in phos, your feed rations is going to cause that. So, one thing I'm going to say on that part. And then keratoconjunctivitis is pink eye. I don't know if few kiddos, whenever I was in school, there used to be a few kids that would go home with pink eye. Pink eye is contagious, but they pretty much just start to get blind. Their pupil starts to really dilate and they can't see very good. Or they start to get a cloud, and they can't see out of one eye. But goats can actually develop pink eye when they're born, like within the first week or two. And so that happens a lot at our place. And so sometimes you can fix it, sometimes you can't reverse it. Vetericyn makes a pink eye spray. It's in a liquid bottle. We use that a lot. Some vets are thinking about, like they do for cats, because cats can get it too. They can give it fluid, I just can't remember what it's called. But if you tell your vet what you have, pink eye, just say I need something for it. If you can't go get Vetericyn, just call the vet and they'll give you something to give it in the eye. And pretty much that's what I'm saying. It's just clouding the people. They just can't see very good. So if they're in the barn a lot and there's not a lot of airflow and it's pretty dusty, that happens a lot as well. So sometimes it's just them. So they can get it. And then copper toxicity. How many of you, I know Collins, do you still have sheep? Okay. How many of you show sheep in here besides Collins? Okay. So you probably know what I'm talking about. Copper tox. Because that's why you don't need to give sheep and goats feed the same amount or the same feed, right? Because sheep and copper, they can handle more copper than goats can. You'll end up losing one if you feed sheep and goats the same, like a higher amount of copper with your goats, because the goats will die. We've had actually a few pass from this. So make sure your rations are important and make sure you understand how much copper goes into your rations, and if you feed them, I'm sure you guys don't feed them separately. I mean, you do feed them separately. I'm just making sure you know that, but don't feed them together if you can. Feed them separately, at least for the evening and the morning. That's important. You don't want to eat and lose one. So, copper toxicity is whenever there's high levels of copper in the liver. That's where it breaks it down, and that's where just they get overloaded and they pretty much just pass away from it. And then other clinical signs of that, besides knowing if you have high copper, the diet, if they are going off feed, if there's blood in the urine, if they get really weak and they kind of have a hard time staggering and when they're walking, it's another sign. I've seen that happen before. More than likely, if you already see this happening, it's pretty hard to get them to not pass away. So more than likely you will lose them. At least that's what's happened in our case. So more than likely you need to drench as soon as possible if you see it, electrolytes to help flush whatever you can out. But when it's in that liver, just like, a bad substance like drugs or alcohol, I know there's you in the room, but whenever you have a lot of that in the liver, guess what? They're more than likely going to pass away from it whenever they get too much in there, in the liver. So I would call a vet, but I haven't had anything go the way it's supposed to in that regard, so I would just say electrolytes and then call a vet, but be prepared to lose it, because that can happen. Yep, that is it. So, like I said, next month, we have our next meeting on May the 11th, still the same time at 5:30. And then if I know that's maybe a week of, graduation or other track meets, and if we have the same amount of kids, we may try to reschedule. So telling Kayla is I like to cover nutrition and parts of the goat before we do showmanship stuff in June. So I'd like everyone to be here as much as possible. Please bring this, because there's going to be notes in here I'd like you to look at. And then we'll do either parts of the goat as an activity, or we'll just walk through it, okay? Because I feel like it's very important. So if anyone doesn't have any other questions, that's all that I have. So, yes?
Can I ask you questions about like abscesses? Like what if they get added like an abscess, like that, you drain it but it comes back? What would you do?
So are you talking about the CL? Like where's your abscess getting? Where's your
It's like on
abscess?
its knees.
It's on its front knee,
It's on
Really? Is it both of them or just the one?
both of them, and
one's
it's,
like bigger than the other.
yeah, you can move it around. I don't think it's a CO.
Do you have a picture of it?
No, I don't think so.
Like you can squish it,
Yeah.
and you can feel the fluid in it.
So you've lanced it and let it drain and it comes back, and it's just on the knees.
Yeah.
So what are they laying on? Like so at your facility, where do you have them on regular ground, or do you have it on something else? And then
You
just
put
tell me.
them on mats.
Okay. I've never had that happen.
Her dad said that whenever he picked him up, the pickup bed was hot, and so he doesn't know if it, like whenever they were laying down, if it burnt the knees and blistered up.
Possible. Have you taken it to a vet yet?
No.
I would take him to a vet just to make sure. I've never had that happen, so.
The first
I-
time we drained it, it came back. But
Is it bloody or is it white pus?
It wasn't pus. It was just like actual like, fluid.
Clear.
Actual fluid, like clear?
Almost clear, but like a small trace of blood, and the second time had more.
Yeah, it could be just a burn, because usually if it's, white or like our pimples, in females and males, pimples, when you get like a pus, it's because there's an infection. It doesn't sound, when there's blood like that, it looks like it's coming from a little bit of the blood, but if it's fluid, clear, possibly could be that. I would, if you can, just take them to a vet, it won't hurt. Is any of the other goats have it? Or just
We
this
think
one?
that one might start to get it a little bit, but
Okay, yeah, I would just take him to a vet, just because I'm not a vet, but I've never have had that happen.
Yeah, the specialist didn't know either.
Yeah, I'm sure. So, cause who's the vet here in town?
We don't have one.
Don't have one anymore? And you live here in Johnson. I know Tara Rooney, she works out at Syracuse Dairy and travels a lot, but she's not she's more of a cattle vet. Our vet, Becky Leggett, she's a female, she's just now starting, she's been starting up for a while, but she does a lot of goat work for us. If you can get a picture, maybe we can get one sent to her. I'm trying to think of other like good goat vets. I know there's gotta be one in Elkhart somewhere, because I know there's people that breed goats in Elkhart, in like Boise City area. So I would call around, have your parents call and ask a few vets too. I would recommend Elkhart. Our vet is good. I can't remember if you had a vet here or not. I think it's Dr. Cantrell, and I don't know who else is in Ulysses. There's a few people that show and breed goats in Ulysses too, so with that being a closer option, I would try those two. And then if they don't know the answer or know how to fix it, then maybe try like Garland City or Liberal. I'm gonna recommend you to a vet, because I've never had that happen, so I'm being completely honest. So, it sounds like a weird situation, and especially the one gets it, then it could be that they've gotten burned and they're just retaining fluid, but it's really weird that it's on their knees, and it's not on anywhere on the back of the body or anything like that. Yeah, I would call Ulysses Vet Hospital, and then maybe Elkhart. I know that's a little bit far, but if you can, Liberal, Garden, or Guyman probably be the best options for you guys that are in Johnson. I know Lamar may be a bit far, but I don't know what vet is over there, so I don't want to recommend you to like call that right now. So that's what I would suggest. So let me know if you have any other issues, but that's what I would do, okay? Does anyone else have any other questions? Yes.
What if you are feeding like 4 dogs all together, like what if you have them?
No, that shouldn't be, but, you know, is one bigger, like taller than the other and a bigger body? Okay, then more than likely they'll end up eating a lot more than they need to, and that little one in the pen may not eat as much, or as much as they need to. So they're okay probably right now. I'm not saying that something's gonna happen. I'm just saying feed-wise, you know, like for county fair, here in the next June, when those little ones aren't eating near as much as they need to, you might need to feed that bigger one less and let the other ones feed together.
You get 3 leathers and 1 little doe.
Yeah, I would feed that doe. If she's not getting as much feed and she's not, and you know she's not getting what she needs, feed her separately. Let the weathers fight it out, is what I would say. But sometimes you don't have time to hand feed everything. But if you can, I'd feed that little doe as much as she will let you give her, okay? But let me know by next month if you have any troubles, but I don't think you will. I always like to tell people that so they can be prepared, okay? Because that will happen, especially if you have a little one and they're just not eating near as much. Yes, Emma?
Once I get home from school normally, my goat's feed is normally almost all gone.
Oh, gone? When do you feed them?
Just like have a kind of a full scoop
Mm-hmm. But when? Do you feed them twice a day or once a day?
twice a day.
Twice a day. Okay. Well, that's good. Yeah. No, if you're feeding them in the morning, you need to make sure that they eat it during that time. I don't want any feed afternoon or lunchtime. It means they're not. It's either too much, and you just kind of like. How many of you, besides Collins, how many of you shows hogs too? Okay. Are you guys hand feeding them, or are you putting them in a self feeder for the hogs? Like the self feeder? What about you? Hand feed? Hand feed scoops? That's good. So like hogs, and any other animal I'm speaking to existence, cattle is hard.
I
But
got a steer.
yeah, but same thing. So before I run too long here, but that's really important, and I'm glad you brought that up. So, you know, the bigger that the animal is, but also it's really important that they don't eat too much at that time, but they also can go to the bunk when they need to eat. So when I say don't feed them too much in the morning and they're still feed, you know, in an hour or 2 after, you're feeding them too much. Back it off. Especially if you're feeding just 1 or 2. If there's like 3 or 4 in the pen, more than likely you're going to have clean bunks, especially within the 30, 45 minutes, because they're all going to be hungry. And that one's going to be hungrier than the little one at times. So they're not going to eat as good, so they're not going to be as efficient with that feed. So if they're not cleaning that bunk up in the morning and at night, you're feeding them too much. Back it off. Either by a whole can or half. You want to slowly feed them a smaller amount, so whenever they clean it up each time, you add a little bit more. You add a half a can. If you're adding a lot more, if you have 4 to 5 head in a pen and you're not feeding them individually, add another can in there, but make sure when it cleans up, don't leave any extra stuff in the pen, because that means they're not eating what they need to. They're eating too much and they're not near as hungry. When they go to the bunk, they need to be hungry and they need to eat. They don't, unlike us, there's no snacking involved, okay? No snacks for animals, okay? Like, when I mean by that, I don't want feed in the afternoon and after 12 o'clock. there should be no feed. They get feed twice a day, once in the morning and once at night. Okay? That helps them. Keeps them regular, helps them from overeating, but two, they grow a lot better. So, everyone understand? Okay, just watch their feed. Make sure they're getting what they need, and the right goats are getting what they need, and those little ones aren't. If they're not getting enough, feed them extra or feed them separately. Okay? They'll really help them grow. Yes, ma'am.
I got 2 questions. One was, after a show, you're supposed to use disinfectant soap on your lands.
Antifungal.
Okay, that's no problem. Then you gotta blow them out before you haul, right? So they're not wet when you're
Yeah.
hauling.
Yeah, if you don't have cows, yeah,
Okay,
you can blow
second
them out.
one was, what are they using to disinfect equipment? Leather halters and chains?
So at our fair, my mom, she's been the, parent leader for forever. So we use Clorox, like straight up Clorox, like bleach, straight up.
Really?
Yes. It will kill anything, right? Kind of like coronavirus. So we're trying to kill that as much as possible. So a lot of people may use Clorox, Lysol, or bleach straight up. I may dilute it a little bit, especially if you have little kids helping you. But if it's just you and maybe an older kid, use some gloves. But I would put all that, if you can, use your chains and your combs, anything like that. Maybe soak it in a bucket or a tub in hot water, bleach, let it soak. That's what I would recommend, if that helps.
And how long do you let it soak?
Huh?
How long do you let it soak?
I mean, as long as you can, just like dishwater. I mean, what we kind of do like an hour, and when it starts, I mean, if you have the time, if you have other things to do, and let it soak and come back and rinse it off, that's what I would do. But then, I think you're fine 30 to 45 minutes, or maybe at max if you don't want to do an hour. But that's what I would suggest.
And the blankets the same way?
So we don't do blankets like bleaching. We do hand wash them. And my grandma actually does them in the laundry washer and dryer because she's a nicer lady than most. So she will literally put Tide stuff and a little bit of extra bleach and vinegar, just a cocktail stuff in that. If you don't want to put them in the washer and dryer, I mean, we don't put them in the dryer. We actually do let them hang, but in the washer. If not, just soak it in a bucket, same scenario. I probably wouldn't put as much bleach because that color of the blanket will drain. So if that's the case, I just use Tide and vinegar. It's mostly what I think my grandma uses on washing the blankets. And then obviously in your trailer, you can get one of those spray bottles with water and put bleach in there and just douse stuff with that. That'll really help clean. So that's what I would recommend.
Okay.
That answers your question. So, okay. Anybody else? Okay, well, if not, that's all that I have. I think I gave you guys my cell phone number and email, but if not, Kayla has it, so if you have any other questions that pop up between next month, that's great. Just let me know. Be happy to answer, or I'll try to refer you to someone else. So, that's all I have, but thank you guys for staying with me. So, I'll see you guys next month, okay?